But we start right here in New York City, where a lunch break just began after a pretty wild morning at Trump's trial. It's the former president accused of a crime. But today's proceedings have been focused squarely on his former fixer, Michael Cohen, his credibility, his likability, and the lengths he went to protect his boss as Election Day 2016 approached. Cohen hasn't even taken the stand, but his name has already come up more than 1,000 times at this trial so far. I want to bring in NBC's Yasmin Vossoughian, who's outside the courthouse. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor, Georgetown law professor, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Jim Messina served as White House deputy chief of staff under President Obama and led his 2012 re-election campaign. And Danny Cevallos joins me here in studio. He's a criminal defense attorney and an MSNBC legal analyst. There is so much to get to, Danny. It's been Keith Davidson on the stand, right? But the focus keeps coming back again and again and again to Michael Cohen 1,000 times. He's been name-checked in this trial. A lot of what we heard hasn't been flattering, but is that actually part of the state's strategy here?
Here's the thing. Cooperating witnesses or people like Michael Cohen, who is cooperating witness-esque, they always have problems. And in fact, in the grand scheme of things, witnesses like Michael Cohen and Keith Davidson really aren't even all that bad in the spectrum of cooperating witnesses. These are often people who are hardened criminals who may be brought into court in shackles and in prison gear. You don't have that with Michael Cohen or Keith Davidson. But the people know that these are problematic witnesses because they seem seedy. Michael Cohen seems impulsive, rude, and possibly even somebody who makes bad decisions all on his own. The people know this, so they're getting out in front of it. They're doing the right thing, what you should always do with cooperators, what I'm sure Paul Butler did many times, is you get in front of the problem, you bring it out in your direct examination that these people are problematic. The people know that Davidson's going to say these bad things about Cohen. They know because they're asking the questions about Cohen, and it's good for the people to get this out in the open instead of letting the defense expose it and the people look like they've been hiding this the whole time.
All right, Paul, the defense has spent the last hour or so trying to discredit Keith Davidson, of course, the lawyer for the two women at the heart of this, and they want to show that he cannot tie the Stormy Daniels payoff back to Donald Trump directly. Do you think that they have been successful in undermining that testimony?
Somewhat. So the cross-examination so far has emphasized that it's Donald Trump who's on trial, and Keith Davidson never had any personal contact with Donald Trump. One of the first questions Davidson was asked on cross was whether he had ever seen Donald Trump in person before this trial. And Davidson said this was the first time. So he's testified that he believes Michael Cohen was acting on behalf of Trump, but the defense is going to suggest that there's reasonable doubt.
Yasmin, tell me what you can then about how both sides have tried to use Davidson's testimony to make their case.
It was, Chris, I have to say, a really fascinating morning, to say the least. When we talk about the direct from the prosecution with Davidson, they talked about really the timeline. They talked about the pseudonyms that were used, right? The loyalty for Michael Cohen, his fervent kind of commitment to making sure this deal went through, his loyalty to Donald Trump in communications with Davidson and making sure the payoff went through, but then also his difficulties in communicating with Davidson and Dylan Howard having to act as an intermediary or a mediator because Michael Cohen was becoming so difficult to communicate with, and Davidson felt as if he was not being truthful with him about why it was they were trying to delay the payment. And we know allegations have been made that it was Donald Trump, in fact, who wanted to delay the payments until after the election, depending on whether or not he won or lost that election. It was interesting to see that entire timeline, Chris, laid out. And then when we went into cross-examination, it was all about chipping away at the credibility of Davidson as an attorney, right? His list of clientele, his roster of clients that he has served, going after, for instance, Lindsay Lohan when she was in rehab. They wanted to chip away really at the credibility, and they did that for quite some time. Bovee really kind of went at Davidson for quite some time in his cross-examination of him. And there was a risk, I think, for the jury in seeing that and saying, okay, we know what you're trying to get. Let's get back to the matter at hand. And when Bovee eventually circled back to what they were dealing with, they talked about, for instance, the retainer that Davidson took from Karen McDougal, and that the initial agreement between Karen McDougal and Bovee was for, I believe, a 25% retainer. That retainer then increased to 35%, making Davidson, seem as if he were out more for money than anything else. It was a real interesting morning, I would say. And I think the big moment for the prosecution was when Davidson had emailed Howard on the night of 2016 and said, "What have we done?" And Howard emails back, "My God." And this was the night in which we learned that Donald Trump had become the next president of the United States in 2016. A real moment, Chris, inside that courtroom for the prosecution, and understanding what had led up to that moment just 2 weeks, by the way, prior. The emails beginning 2 weeks prior on October 26th, as laid out, Chris, by the prosecution.
Does that moment, Danny, that Yasmin just pointed out, say unequivocally to jurors, at least in the minds of these two guys, they knew who was behind this, and it was Donald Trump. They knew who they were trying to protect, and it was Donald Trump.
Yes, but the people know that David Dennison is not giving them Trump's involvement. They must have more evidence of Trump's involvement. That's the one thing that's glaringly absent. It seems to me the people's plan here is to first establish the element of their case that is the transaction from Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels. And then presumably they're going to shore up the Trump involvement part later. That'll obviously come from Michael Cohen. It may come from other places, maybe Hope Hicks. We don't know yet. But they are trying to lock in, and I think they put a lot of evidence in. It's almost indisputable at this point that Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels this money. But David Dennison, and even David Pecker to some degree, is never going to give the people absolutely Donald Trump's involvement, and they know that. What they're getting from David Dennison is irrefutable proof at this point, in my view, that there was a transaction from Michael Cohen, a payment of money to Stormy Daniels, and that he brokered the entire seedy affair. And it is a seedy affair. It's not necessarily bad for the prosecution. They want them to see every element of it. David Dennison gives lawyers like me an introduction into an area of law practice I never knew existed, which is the underbelly of celebrity payoffs for silence, something I never knew existed.
All right, so Paul, it was really interesting to follow, even on our document. We're not in court, any of us. But the prosecution also then brought up Stormy Daniels' denial that she had a relationship with Trump. She signed a document, we think, maybe, to that end, something Trump himself posted about right before the trial started. So what did we learn? Put this in perspective for us, and why the prosecution even brought it up.
So Trump has suggested that Stormy Daniels, just like Michael Cohen, is a liar. She'll say anything because she doesn't like Donald Trump. And so at one point, she engaged in this kind of lawyerly answer about her relationship with Donald Trump. The truth seems to be that they had a one-night stand in terms of sex. And after that, they had something like a business friendship, I guess you could call it. And so when she says very specifically that she didn't have a extended romantic relationship with him, the defense will suggest that's just this sleazy lawyer being sleazy once more, being very lawyerly, but not really trying to come up with the truth. So again, they're just trying to suggest that this guy is an extortionist. They've also presented or asked questions to elicit that he threatens high-profile people like Donald Trump. He threatens them by threatening to expose their secrets unless they pay him off. So the defense wants the jury to think that the hush money payments were not about helping Trump win the election, which is the prosecution's claim. The defense wants the jury to think this was an old-fashioned shakedown scheme committed by a sleazy lawyer who the prosecutors are presenting as a star witness.
Jim, let's talk about the politics of this. This deal between Cohen and Davidson to hide Stormy Daniels' story was signed on October 27th. That's less than 2 weeks before Election Day. And honestly, people were already voting. So if that story came out at that moment, Is it reasonable to think it could have changed enough minds that it swings the election?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. Because remember what's happening around that. You have the Access Hollywood tape. You have kind of all of this happening as voters are making up their mind in the final part of the election. We know as political professionals that up to 10% of Americans make their minds up in the final week or so. And so if you're the Trump campaign or you're Michael Cohen, you just cannot allow this to get out there. And that's why they did this. It was absolutely clear from a campaign perspective, you just could not have this coming out right in the middle of an election in the final days when voters are actually, to your point, voting every single day. So people like Michael Cohen are hired to make this go away, and that's clearly what happened.
Let me make an argument on the other side, that this is no longer the 60s or the 70s, that this is not a case where a presidential candidate goes on a boat named Monkey Business with a woman who is not his wife and finds himself in trouble as a candidate. You're convinced that it would have made a difference?
Because remember how close that election was. We're talking just thousands of votes in a few key states. And, it just goes into the entire narrative that the Clinton campaign at the time was trying to move, that Donald Trump was shady and had all these problems and was a shyster. And this would feed that narrative, especially, Chris, around the Access Hollywood. I mean, this would have been a two-part series here to show what this guy is and who he is to these swing women voters who ended up going away from Clinton to Trump in the final days of that election after the Comey letter.